And now it's Deborah Kobylt Live.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today on my show, Deborah Kobylt Live. And joining me is Stuart Waldner, who wrote this book, Escape the Meatrix. Eat plants, feel great, save the planet. Thanks so much for joining us, Stuart. And I'd like to say to my audience, this is really not your typical eat plants sort of book, because you base it in a tremendous amount of science. And I like that. You've done a lot of research into plant-based products and adopting that as our lifestyle, right?
Yeah, that's right. I wanted my book to be science-based because I think, helping people make informed decisions, that's kind of what I wanted to do. And I think the science that I talk about in my book will help people make better decisions, starting with the choices that they make in the grocery aisle and the food that they have on their plates.
A lot of people will say, ew, I don't like plant-based products. What do you say to them? And second question will be, how am I going to get enough protein if I have a plant-based diet? Go ahead.
Well, to answer the first question, I would ask, when was the last time you tried a plant-based, meat alternative or dairy alternative? Because, there's been an explosion of plant-based eaters in our country, and the market has responded. The growth hasn't been steady. It's been exponential in recent years. And so more and more plant-based foods are coming to market. So I would ask, when was the last time you tried a plant-based burger? Because these are not like the black bean burgers from years ago. They're so much more meat-like, and so much, and the cheese is so much better now, the plant-based cheeses now, at mimicking the, dairy cow's cheese. And so that would be my first question. And then to answer the question about protein, it's a myth that we have to eat animal-based foods to get protein. And, the meat industry wants us to think that they have a monopoly on protein, and the dairy industry wants us to think they have a monopoly on calcium. But they don't. These are nutrients, and these nutrients are found in a wide variety of plant-based foods. In fact, the United States Academy of Dietetics and Nutrition says that, plant-based foods contain all the nutrients we need to be healthy at any stage of life.
What are some of the, the beans and plant-based foods that have a lot of protein? Because a lot of folks I know will say, yeah, but I need that protein to keep me full. Otherwise, I'm not full. What would you say to them?
Well, there are, like I said, the plant-based meat alternatives that have come out recently by companies by Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat, things like that have a fair amount of protein in them. Sometimes the products had the same amount of protein that a animal-based product would. So I think those are excellent ways to get protein. And when I think of those products as, Deborah, is like a gateway plant-based food, because we are accustomed to building our menu and our plate around a piece of animal protein. And if we can just swap out that animal protein, that piece of chicken, with some plant-based chicken, we're still getting the protein, and it's going to be so much healthier for us and healthier for the planet, and of course, healthier for the animals. But, you don't have to purchase one of these plant-based meat alternatives, because fortunately, there's plenty of protein to be found in other plant-based foods, whole grains, beans, legumes. And then you have plant-based proteins that have been around for generations and thousands of years, like tofu, and then edamame, which is soybeans, and tempeh. These are excellent plant-based sources for protein.
And they're really, really good. They're tasty, at least to me. I know everybody has a different palate, but I love them. You can season them. There's so much you could do with them. You can grind them up as well. Let's talk about the title of your book, Escape the Meatrix. Where did that come from?
Well, I'm using the world in the Matrix movies as a metaphor for our world. In the Matrix movies, artificial intelligence has taken over the planet and is using human beings as an energy source. And so I say our world is similar because, human beings, we've taken over this planet. We just had the 8 billionth person born on Earth last year. And so we have taken over this planet, and we're using farmed animals as our energy source. So I say that we're living in the Meatrix.
Now, let's talk about farmed animals. Let's talk about the methane gas situation. Let's talk about the atmosphere, the earth, all of that. by using farmed animals. And very often it can be very cruel in some of these farms and certainly some of the factories, right?
Sure.
Let's talk first about the gases that are emitted into the air. And then let's talk about the farming, some of the farming practices.
Okay, so, we know that burning fossil fuels releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is accelerating, global warming of the planet and increasing climate change. But what doesn't get reported that often is methane. And methane is a shorter lived greenhouse gas, but it's much more potent. So for instance, in the first 20 years, methane is 80 times more efficient at trapping heat into our atmosphere than carbon dioxide. And over a 100-year period, it's 25 times more potent. So methane is really the low-hanging fruit. If we really want to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions quickly, we want to remove methane. And the problem with animal agriculture is it releases a lot of methane. Ruminant animals, cows, sheep, goats, and lambs, these animals produce methane. And in fact, the EPA says the largest source of methane in the United States comes from animal agriculture. So, why is the mainstream media talking about the food on our plates? This is the low-hanging fruit, and we need to address it. I downloaded the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the first piece of legislation that we have that is geared towards reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And I think it's great that we finally did that. It's way overdue, and it's just a start. But I downloaded it and looked at it, and it does talk about methane, but it does not talk about animal agriculture at all. And based on what the EPA says, I think this is a big mistake. And I think mainstream media isn't talking about it, which is why I want to be on shows like yours so we can have a conversation.
Now, there are critics that are saying in order to go plant-based, we might end up using too much water. What do you say to that?
I would say this. A plant-based person saves 1,100 gallons of water, 45 pounds of grain, 35 square feet of forest, 20 pounds of carbon dioxide equivalent in the life of one animal every day. That's how powerful it is to become plant-based. So talk about water, just by becoming plant-based, you're saving 1,100 gallons of water every day. In fact, Oxford University did a 5-year study, Deborah, of 38,000 farms in 119 countries, and they determined that the average American could reduce their personal carbon footprint by 73% simply by becoming plant-based. There's no single other thing that we could do that could lower our carbon footprint that much. I advocate for everyone to adopt a whole foods plant-based lifestyle. I've been doing this for 38 years. I'm in perfect health. It can be done, and it's never been easier or tastier to do it. But you don't have to be 100% like me. Just giving up eating animal-based foods one day a week, start out there and maybe 2 days a week later. So just any kind of reduction that we can make will not only benefit us and our health, it'll help reduce emissions, and it'll, of course, will be a lot better for the animals.
Let's talk about some of the studies that have been done scientifically about some of the health benefits to eating a plant-based diet, please.
Yes, well, I have in my book, I list the top 10 leading causes of death in the United States, and I list the science behind why a whole foods plant-based lifestyle helps protect us from these leading causes of death. And so the first one is heart disease, and the plant-based lifestyle is the only lifestyle that has been proven to reverse heart disease with results in as little as 3 weeks. I mean, we have the scans to prove this. So that's our number one killer. And this is because we're eating way too many animal-based foods, and the saturated fats in animal-based foods leads to heart disease and leads to heart attacks. Our second second killer in the country is cancer. And the Mayo Clinic says 25% of all cancers could be prevented through nutrition alone. And they also say that vegans, those who are following a plant-based lifestyle and don't eat any animal-based foods, appear to have the lower rates of cancer than any group of people. And so the list just goes on and on. And one of the things that really blew my mind, Deborah, was in terms of lung function. So 2 of the top 10 leading causes of death have to do with our lungs. So I think it's COPD and also other infections of the respiratory system. So the National Institute of Health says that the standard American diet which is full of animal-based foods, is the equivalent of chronic smoking. So a standard American diet is the equivalent for our lungs of smoking a pack of cigarettes every day. And that the study goes on to say that, eating whole fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes, seeds, and nuts has the opposite effect. It preserves lung function. So, that blew my mind. I had no idea that the foods we eat could diminish our lung capacity, that much. And the list goes on and on.
I didn't realize that as well. Also, I read about studies being done with Alzheimer's, memory loss. Could you address that as well for us, please?
Certainly. So only 6 to 7% of Alzheimer's has a genetic component to it, and which is great news for most people, because that means the rest of the Alzheimer's disease that people are being diagnosed with has a lifestyle component to it. So we can help prevent being diagnosed with this horrible, debilitating, disease by managing our risk factors for Alzheimer's. And those risk factors happen to be reducing our consumption of animal-based foods. And that's because the saturated fats in animal-based foods doesn't just affect the blood flow to our hearts. It is indiscriminate. It affects the blood flow everywhere in our body, including to our brain. And so this leads to cognitive decline and can also lead to Alzheimer's disease. So the great news is that we can, manage our risk factors for contracting AD simply by giving up animal-based foods and adopting a whole foods, plant-based lifestyle.
Talk to me about you. Why did you adopt a plant-based everything? Because I believe you don't even wear leather shoes. None of it. I mean, you really go the whole way with this. Talk to me about what led you to adopt a plant-based life.
Well, I live in Kentucky, and I grew up in the state of Kentucky, which is a beautiful part of our country, full of lovely people, good, kind-hearted people, but also with a lot of unhealthy people, unfortunately. So Kentucky ranks 48th in healthy behaviors and 47th in health outcomes. And there's only one other state that has more people with multiple chronic health conditions than Kentucky, and that's our neighbor, West Virginia. So I grew up in a state with a lot of unhealthy people. And in fact, when my mother's parents came to visit, my grandfather had asthma and emphysema, and he required nebulizer treatments 3 times a day. And so he would have to travel with this machine, and he'd put medicine in a little glass pipe and do these treatments 3 times a day. And my grandmother, who had a lot of vascular problems too, she had osteoporosis, and she just kept getting more and more bent over and smaller, and I grew up surrounded with people like that. And I just thought that it was inevitable. We were all going to come down with some kind of chronic condition. And all we could hope for was to manage it as best we could with pills, shots, and surgeries. And that's, the mentality of a lot of people in the state, unfortunately. But at the age of 23, I made a huge lifestyle change based on the information that was coming out at the time about the link between heart disease and meat. And I gave up all meat, and that was in 1985 at the age of 23. So I decided to make a lifestyle change, basically because I didn't want to become a statistic,
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I know you're a very healthy person. Clearly, I guess if you were to eat meat, like when you did that, you were eating meat and suddenly you transitioned over. What did you feel like? I know it was a while back, the first 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 months. Did you sort of feel lifted? Because that's what I read from people who decide to go plant-based. After a while, everything about them feels lighter, if you will. Could you address that?
Yeah, definitely. I think I noticed a difference immediately because, animal-based foods take a lot longer for our bodies to process. And so, when we eat plant-based foods, they go through our digestive tract in about 24 hours, whereas it can take up to 2 days for meat to pass through our bodies. And so we're freeing up all that energy that we would be spending digesting meat and animal protein. We're freeing up that energy to do other things. So I found that I had a lot more energy to do other things in life that I was interested in doing. And I wasn't spending so much time, trying to digest the meat that I was eating. And, things happen like my allergies improved dramatically. Kentucky's known for not having, really great air quality here because we're kind of in a big valley. And there are a lot of people here who suffer from allergies. And I noticed when I gave up the dairy and that my allergies became much, much better. In fact, I don't even see an allergist anymore as a result of that. So.
Typical meal for you, right? If I were to come over, I don't know if you do 3 meals, breakfast, lunch, dinner, but what do you like to make? Are there any favorite recipes you'd like to pass along to my audience and say, you know what, I love combining this and this, like anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, this is the winter months here in Kentucky. It's kind of cool. So I like making a plant-based chili with, kidney beans and black beans and tomatoes, red peppers, yellow peppers, some, chili seasoning, some cumin, some smoked paprika, and just cook that on the stove on low heat all day. And I love to serve that on a baked sweet potato. That's my favorite way of eating chili, with some plant-based sour cream and then some pumpkin seeds on top of that. But, we eat everything, plant-based eater eats everything that, other people eat. I have pizzas, I have burgers, I have ice cream if I want, cakes if I want, tacos. I mean, it's endless. The possibilities are endless because there's so many products now available that you can buy at the grocery that just make this, you can make the transition seamless if you want. It's just amazing now. It used to be a lot harder than it is today. And I say it's never been easier or tastier to become plant-based than it is today.
Yeah, there are a lot of options. I want to touch upon, before we let you go, the animals, because sometimes that really creates a picture in my mind, what's going on in some of these farms and in particular in the factories. Could you paint a picture for some people, would you, of what's going on out there with these animals and how they're treated?
Well, I'm glad you asked. A lot of people avoid this topic, but, I think a lot of people think that farmed animals, have no interest in their lives and they're just food commodities, and they're like willing participants in the meat industry and in the dairy industry. The dairy industry, to me, is even in many ways more cruel than the meat industry when it comes to how we treat animals. So, this is a big problem because almost every American says they're concerned about how farmed animals are treated. But most people don't realize that all the harm that we do to farmed animals is unnecessary. We don't have to harm an animal at all to live a healthy, long, happy life. And, all the people like myself who are eating plant-based foods are proof of that. So all the harm that we do to farmed animals is unnecessary. And, a lot of people say, well, I get free range eggs or whatever. And so I talk about how these are, euphemisms, really. They're sound bites, marketing sound bites that kind of pacify the consumer into thinking that they're doing something good with their dollars and that they're actually buying a better product. But the thing that I discovered when I was researching my book is that to qualify for a label of free ranged, it conjures this image of chickens just, galloping in fields and, foraging and roosting as they please. But, to qualify for that label, a chicken only has to have access to the outdoors, Deborah, for 5 minutes a day. And it doesn't have to be full bodied. It can just be a pop hole that they can stick their head out of. And so this is what the average consumer doesn't realize. And some people say, well, I get, my beef is free range. Maybe it is, you're paying a huge price for that, but it's important to realize that 98 to 99% of all chickens and pork are factory farmed. And I think it's like almost 80% for beef in this country. So the vast majority of animals are living in crowded, horrible conditions that prevent them from doing all the things that they would normally do if they weren't in such confined spaces around, thousands and thousands of other animals just like them. So it is, it's a real problem. And it's one of the reasons why I gave up eating all animal-based foods. Because, for me, there's no right way to do the wrong thing. And I realized, why would I take the life of an animal for food that the science in my book shows we don't need. So I can't justify that in my own mind and in my own heart. So everybody has to make this decision themselves. And the problem is, and we were born into the Meatrix, and so we don't think we have a choice. And what I wanted to do with my book is I wanted to invite the reader to know that they do have a choice. I wrote my book after 38 years of doing this because I feel like we're at a critical time on our planet. We're seeing, climate change, emerging infectious diseases, biodiversity loss, like the loss of the rainforest, mass extinction rates, our declining health, to the horrible return on investment of animal agriculture. I mean, all of this is happening right now on the planet, and we're seeing it and we're hearing about it in the media every day. And that is the blue pill. We can choose the blue pill and we're going to get more of the same. That's just tantamount to maintaining the status quo. But we have a choice. We can choose the red pill and we can escape the Meatrix, and we can reap the benefits of a healthy plant-based lifestyle for our health, the health of the planet, and the health of the animals. And I really liked what someone said when they reviewed my book. They said, read it and reap, because that's so true. We're going to reap all the benefits of this. And I just encourage people to read my book with an open mind, follow the science. I have over 400 citations in my book. Everything's been fact checked. You can go through the citations and discover, the studies that I talk about in my book for yourself if you want. But the science, I think, is overwhelming that this is the direction that we need to go. I just read today that the city of Edinburgh in Scotland became the first city in Scotland and the first capital in the EU to adopt the plant-based treaty. And I was happy to find out that Los Angeles actually endorsed this plant-based treaty. And what this treaty says is we need to reduce our consumption of meat and dairy in order to achieve our climate goals. And that's what mainstream media rarely talks about. And this is what we need to do. We need to have a conversation about, animal agriculture and the harm that it's doing to the planet and to us, and how it fuels climate change. Climate change is here, and I just hope that my book will help us avert the worst case scenarios of climate change. It's not too late for us to avert the worst case scenarios. And I know California had, horrible rain. Is it still raining there now, or are you still dealing with the flooding?
Today it's not. We personally in our home had to deal with the flooding. It was we had trees come down, trees that are not even native to California, that aren't even on my property, and they slammed into our property. It's just, you sometimes wonder the way people do things, the way they developed an area, right? They bring in, for example, eucalyptus trees that aren't even native here, bring them to California. They can't handle our soil, and then they topple over. It's just you sometimes wonder. You talk about climate change, you talk about making appropriate changes. We have to start with ourselves first as human beings. What are we doing? We have to think. We really have to think, whether it's planting a tree or using animals as our food when there are other choices, Right. So, and you really are very clear about that in your book. And I want to get back for just a quick second, because we are going to have to let you go in a moment, about animal cruelty, because you touched upon dairy. When I first learned about what happens, how a mama cow will give birth, and all mamas want to be near their babies, but the farmer comes, grabs the calf, and runs off. And we know what happens to the calf, right? It's called veal. And the mom is running after the van for her baby. And then she is put into a lifetime of being milked. And when I first saw that, I thought, this is horrendous. These are families. And people have to remember that animals have families just as we do. And now a lot of people will say, so what? Survival of the fittest. Does it really mean that we have the right to do that? Because perhaps we can, right? So from a humanity point of view, we have to rethink what we're doing as well. That's very, very important to me. You do touch upon it in the book.
Yeah, just because we can do something, and just because we have historically done something, doesn't mean we should continue doing it. I'll talk about traditions in my book, and how traditions are handed down generation to generation to generation, and like fishing and hunting, but also the tradition of eating meat and of drinking cow's milk. I mean, this is a tradition that I never made the conscious choice, Deborah, to drink cow's milk or eat chicken, my parents, or meat. My parents taught me to do that. And it wasn't until I was 23 that I said, hey, I'm going to make a choice. I have a choice. I'm going to make a change with my lifestyle. So the meat eating that we do, for the most part, for many people, it's a mindless activity. It's something we were taught to do, and we don't give it any thought. And, that is something that, we really need to try to interrupt. There's a study in my book that I talk about where they did research with American children ages 4 to 8 years old. And at that age, because of empathy, children consider all animals as being pet-like. And so children said it was wrong to eat a cow. 84% of children said it was wrong to eat a cow, and 79% said it was wrong to eat a pig. But they were eating beef and bacon and not realizing it. And the study says, these children are unsuspecting meat eaters. They're against eating animals, but yet they're being fed animals by their parents. And so they're doing it without realizing that they're doing it. And a lot of times, children don't know where food comes from because they're not on farms. So many children don't have any kind of experience with farm life. It doesn't get talked about, and parents avoid the subject. It's one of the things that parents most often are deceptive about with their children. They don't tell them because, they're trying to instill in children to love and respect animals, but then they're feeding them animals 3 times a day. And so this creates a conflict within adults, and it's called like the omnivore's dilemma. But what happens as we age, Deborah, is right before adolescence, we go through these mental gymnastics and acrobatics in our brain to categorize certain animals as food and certain animals as pets. And so once that happens, then we just kind of disregard the harm that we're doing to farmed animals because we've relegated them as food, and we don't think of them as individuated animals. And there's a lot of science that I point to in my book that I show these studies that have been done, recent studies on the life of farmed animals. We've always had the ability to study farmed animals, but we've never done it because we didn't want to know. But now certain scientists are studying the life of farmed animals, and their lives are much more complex than we ever imagined. And like you said, they have friends and family, and they have feelings, and they care about life. They want to enjoy life, and they care about their friends and family. So we try to ignore the science because it disrupts this idea of us being at the top of some food chain. And I talk about food chains in my book, and I get comments on social media sometimes with people saying, well, I didn't get to the top of the food chain so I can eat salads. Well, humans are not at the top of any food chain. So that's a misnomer right there. And I talk about, food webs and our place in that in my book. So
you touch upon an awful lot in this book. Please, people, pick up Escape the Meatrix, right? How can people find the book, please? And get in touch with you as well.
Well, they can find the book on Amazon, and they can find me if they want to get in touch with me on Facebook, Instagram, and at my website, stuartwaldner.com. And I'm on LinkedIn as well.
And you're on LinkedIn as well. And I hope next for you is a cookbook, because I thought about this as I was reading it. I thought, I bet you he can really cook up a storm to some incredible plant-based menus. I hope that's coming next from you. So
it may be down the road. I didn't include that in this book because there are a ton of plant-based cookbooks on the internet right now. So, there's so many resources that we have available now that we didn't have, even 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. So there's so much available now in terms of recipes and support groups online. If you want to do this by yourself and you don't have the support of your friends or family, then, find support online, because it really does help if you have a community of people that you feel like you're doing this with.
That is very true. And go on your website because there's a lot of great information on your website. Stuart Waldner, thank you so much for joining us. Please, people, pick up Escape the Meatrix. It's a terrific read based in science, which is what I liked about it. Easy to read and easy, if you will, to digest. So thank you so much, Stuart Waldner, for joining our show, Deborah Kobylt Live, which you can find on all video platforms, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and then, of course, on audio platforms, whether it's Amazon, iHeart, Apple Podcasts, you'll find us. So thanks, everybody, for joining our show with Stuart Waldner. I'm Deborah Zara Kobylt, your host. See you next time.